So you want to make a change, but what does changing your life actually look like? How does it actually work? What is the experience of going from being the you that you are to being the you that you would like to be? Hello, I'm David, and welcome to Efficient Wisdom, where we talk about helpful ideas for life with minimal hype. And today I want to talk about this process of personal change because it's not what people often expect it to be. So much of all the advertising around things like life coaching, like what I do, or creating some great new exercise habit, or even taking on some cool new spiritual outlook on life, all of that advertising is often misleading. And of course, it's that way for a reason, because it's way more effective to sell the result than it is to sell the process. That's just the reality of it. Because the reason people don't have the result already is probably because they're avoiding the process. And everyone knows this to some degree, but what often remains misunderstood is exactly what that process actually looks like. So when they finally agree to take on the process to get the result, well, they find themselves confused and frustrated that the process isn't playing out as they expected. And then they misread their own feelings as telling them that maybe this is the wrong process and that they should give up and go back to where they started. Now, of course, people are unique and this process looks different for everyone, but it's also true that there are patterns. There are universals to the human experience. So let me share with you what I've seen and what I've experienced for myself, because although I know all the theory, it's still hard to recognize this process when you're in the middle of it. And that's true for me as well. So there's always the practical side of things, and that's the part of change that looks like a list of things that needs to get done, right? Because change is finally doing all these new things. Because we live in what looks like a cause and effect world, where to get the effect you want, you have to cause it. And on some level that's true, right? The dishes don't clean themselves, the muscles you want don't just appear by wish, and your relationship isn't saved by simply saying love conquers all, right? There's something that you have to do. But the mistake comes when thinking that making all this happen requires some constant force of will, and that all of that looks like some Rocky Balboa style montage sequence where you hyper exert yourself through pure drive and inspiration. You know, I wish. That actually sounds like fun, but it's not the way it works. So in all my time talking with people about their lives, I don't see them make changes in that way, right? I just don't see that happen. It actually looks quite different. Where people actually succeed, is not when they exert their will, but when they surrender a piece of their will. Okay? They focus on a whole other part of the equation. They don't look for what needs to be added to their lives. They look for what needs to be taken away to make extra room in their lives. And that might just be something as simple as their excuses for not doing things or their ideas about the world that just aren't quite accurate. But either way, it's a surrendering of a certain part of the self that you're holding on to really tightly. And once that's let go of, you naturally drift forward. And the action that you wanted to achieve naturally and spontaneously arises because all of the conditions necessary to make it happen are now in place. It simply occurs without force or will. It's almost like it doesn't have a choice but to happen. Okay? Most people have had the experience of being stuck in a bad relationship. And for months or even years, they torture themselves with the decision of whether to stay or whether to go. But then one day, maybe something just changes. Something just clicks. And it's time to go. And so you do. And you do so with a surprisingly quiet certainty. All of a sudden, there's no choice. Right? If you've had that experience, that's what I'm talking about. Right? Once the blockades are removed, you move forward with little effort. All the pain came in all of the time and sacrifices you made repeatedly before trying to hold on to something that wasn't working for you. And once you honestly saw it for what it really was, well, then stepping out becomes the simplest thing in the world. It's the same pattern in every corner of your life, right? Once you allow yourself to really see something for what it is, progress becomes simple and natural and even unavoidable. Okay? In other words, in order to do something new or to become something new, the most effective approach is much less about making yourself do it and instead about becoming someone who naturally does it. Does that make sense? And that happens by letting go of the part of yourself which is stopping it from happening. Okay? And this is kind of a hard thing to explain because I'm just beginning to truly understand it for myself. But I think a lot of it is just about becoming more and more aware of how things naturally and spontaneously occur. And then seeing your place inside that big equation and getting comfortable with the shape of that reality and then surrendering yourself to it. Okay? The ego wants to defeat it. It wants to tame it. It wants to conquer it. But reality is always bigger and more than your ability to defeat, tame, or conquer it. And the path to its greatest gifts is not through conquest, but through surrender. I've been a big fan of Leonard Cohen's music since I was in the 9th grade, which is a long time ago. And over the last several years, one of his songs went from total obscurity to being wildly popular, especially for other artists who want to cover it. And that song is, of course, Hallelujah, right? Everyone's heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. And it seems to relate to everyone universally. But what is that song really saying? If you pay attention to the lyrics, you'll hear a pattern. He sings things like, "The baffled king composing hallelujah." The baffled king, even the king, is baffled by it all. And then there's the next verse. She tied you to a kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair. And from your lips she drew the hallelujah. She broke your throne, she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah. Does that sound like you exercising your will? Or does that sound like a surrender? And then there's the other verse. I've seen your flag on the marble arch, but love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. You do not defeat love. You are defeated by love. That is how you receive love. So to me, what Leonard Cohen is getting at here is that reality is bigger than you are. And what you need from reality is bigger than you are and beyond the force of your will. So getting it or receiving it is not an act of the will, it's a surrender of it. Like the song says, it's not a victory march. The king is baffled. Your throne is broken. And that is how you arrive at hallelujah. So, surrender yourself to the way of things. Submit yourself to reality's opinion. Realize your design. Realize its limitations, but also the potential for possibilities that you can't see yet or that you can't understand, because there's a lot more that you can't see or understand than you do, no matter who you are. And once you see things from that next level, then you're going to act out naturally and spontaneously what you see from that level, right? That's when real change happens. Does that make sense? So, doing something like exercising or starting some new great habit isn't just about having the will to do the thing. It's about removing the will that's stopping you from becoming somebody whose nature it is to do those things. It's not a doing, it's more of a becoming. And the first step to becoming something new is removing the pieces of you that aren't serving you to make room for something that might serve you better. Again, like in the Leonard Cohen song Hallelujah, in the opening verse, he uses a musical composition metaphor to talk about life, which says, "It goes like this, the fourth, the fifth. Now, the fourth and the fifth refers to the names that musicians give chords in a certain progression, right? There's the fourth chord and the fifth chord. And then he sings the minor fall and the major lift. And that's pretty clever because we have major and minor chords. And the minor chords have a sense of sadness about them. And the major chords have kind of a sense of triumph about them. And often they come in that sequence where first there's the minor fall, and then only after that, the major lift. Again, it's such an elegant observation. If you want a great lift, you first have to write in the minor fall. Okay? Now, of course, doing this in real life is almost trickier than trying to use your willpower to force something new into your life, because there is no part of you that wants to be surrendered. There is no belief that you've been holding on to that wants to be proven false. There is no habit in you that wants to comfortably give itself up. There is no piece of your identity that wants to die. But there is a little death that needs to occur. And that's actually a pretty good way of putting it, because that little part of you that needs to die is going to fight for its life. And that battle is going to happen inside you, and you are going to feel it. You are going to feel the death of a part of yourself. And that hurts. And then for a moment, there's not going to be anything to take its place. So it's that pain of that little death, but then it's the confusion and the emptiness that's left over by the hole that piece of you once filled. Your mind is a very complex structure. So if you remove some part of the foundation of that structure, the whole thing is going to get wobbly and affected. And that is uncomfortable, right? The only consolation is that it's temporary. But it has to be removed if it's going to be replaced with something better and stronger and more able to sustain itself. Okay, you can think about evolution out in the world and how nature makes room for a lot of different creations, and each one finds their own little niche to fill. But even nature can't make enough room for every single one of its creations to continue living forever. Some new creatures overtake the old ones. One has to go extinct to allow the next one to take its place. And that's why it's called evolution. There's a constant movement forward and change. And inside the nature of your own mind, it's not really that different. The big changes can only take hold if what's already there is overthrown. And that's the side of nature which is pretty harsh. And nature can be pretty harsh. It's not fun to watch that part, even if you know it might have a positive result in the end. So the question becomes, will you choose to let these pieces of yourself be overthrown deliberately, in a controlled, focused, and purposeful way? And that might look like some new spiritual practice you take on, or some sort of coaching you might do, or going on a walkabout, right? Whatever process works for you best. Or, as another option, will you throw yourself into some random situation that will force you to overthrow these parts of yourself? I mean, isn't this what we do when we set off on some crazy adventure? Haven't you experienced wanting to move someplace completely random and start over? That's the hunger to put yourself in a situation where you are going to be forced to remake yourself, to surrender your old self for something new, because you're having trouble doing it on your own, right? It's not going to get done unless you do that. So you toss in your cards and move to some new city, or you have a fling or some affair, or you do something deliberately self-destructive out of sheer frustration or even just boredom, okay? Or the third choice you might have, and another common option, maybe you do everything you can to keep everything exactly the same, because it might suck there, but at least you know it, and better the devil you know, right? So you walk on eggshells, and you busy yourself with the numbing and distracting of yourself to everything you know is wrong with what you're doing, hoping that the world won't put you in a situation where you're forced to face the inevitable. But of course, it will. The unsustainable will not be sustained. The inevitable is inevitable. And one of these three scenarios that I just talked about will happen. Okay, but The more deliberately or purposefully or mindfully it's done, the less unnecessary damage you'll take on in the process and have to repair later. This is why I go out and I try to sell coaching, because that's what coaching is. If you're going to walk through the fire, then maybe you want to do it with some guidance or some help. But of course, in real life, what happens is probably a mix of all three of these scenarios. You take on deliberately whatever you can. And when you need a change, but you don't know what that change is supposed to look like, you toss in your cards and you throw yourself into a little bit of chaos. And then when the changes you need to make are too overwhelming and intimidating, you avoid them, and then they eventually come looking for you. Okay? So this is my view and my experience on how change actually occurs. It's less about willpower than people think. Of course, there is a little bit of willpower to make yourself do the new uncomfortable thing, but then there's a little bit more of letting go of the will. And then back to using a little more willpower, and then back to letting go of it. It's a push and pull that repeats through life. And the more of this uncomfortable death and rebirth cycle you allow for yourself in life, the further you get. The more you're able to achieve, the more satisfaction you're able to experience. Because a lot of that feeling of satisfaction and growth and adventure comes from this process that I'm talking about unfolding. And another thing that's often surprising is that it doesn't really come from the results you attain through that process, but actually through the journey of the process itself. And that's an even harder thing to sell to people, that your goals are really just an anchor point that you use to kill off the parts of yourself that aren't serving you or serving the ones you love. There's another Leonard Cohen song, and that piece is called The Goal. And the last line of that piece reads, "No one to follow and nothing to teach, except that the goal falls short of the reach." The goal falls short of the reach. Another elegant observation. So if you don't believe me with all of this, take it from Leonard Cohen, right? Like he said, even the king is baffled by it. Love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. The minor fall comes before the major lift, and the goal falls short of the reach. Okay? So that's my thought for today. That's what I think change actually looks like. So you can ask yourself, what do you need to surrender to make room for the things that you want in your life? And are you prepared for the fight that it's going to put up? And for the cloudy, uncomfortable uncertainty that's left over once it surrenders? And then, of course, where do you start looking for what's next? Okay, that's it for me today. Thank you for watching. I hope you found some value in this video. If so, help me to keep doing this by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, leaving your comments below, all that kind of stuff. You can also support all of this by going to the efficientwisdom.com t-shirt shop and picking up one of my many obscure, nerdy metaphors for life printed on t-shirts. And of course, always feel free to reach out to me directly with any coaching-related questions at companioncoaching.com. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.